The champagne in the crystal flute was vintage. The view of the Manhattan skyline was impeccable, and the smile on his wife's face was dazzling. Until Ethan noticed her eyes weren't looking at him, but at the reflection of her phone screen on the glass. It wasn't the affair that shattered him first. It was the way she laughed when he announced the biggest achievement of his career, a laugh that echoed with a cruelty he had spent 10 years pretending not to hear. Beneath the polished marble of their marriage, a fracture had just turned into a canyon, and the secrets hidden in expense reports were about to cost her everything. If you find yourself drawn to stories where the deepest scars are invisible and justice is served cold and precise, stay with me. There are truths hiding in the shadows of this marriage that we are only just beginning to uncover. The maitre d' at Le Cuckoo smiled that practiced, tight-lipped smile reserved for Manhattan's elite, guiding them to a corner table bathed in the soft, amber glow of beeswax candles. It was the best table in the house, reserved weeks in advance. Ethan Caldwell had called in a favor to get it, wanting everything about tonight to be perfect. He adjusted his cuffs, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the Mont Blanc watch on his wrist, a gift to himself. He looked across the table at Victoria. She was stunning, as always. The silk of her emerald dress clung to her shoulders, reflecting the candlelight. She was typing furiously on her phone, the blue light illuminating her high cheekbones, casting harsh shadows that the ambient lighting couldn't soften. "Tori," Ethan said softly. Victoria didn't look up. Her thumbs moved with the dexterity of a concert pianist. "1 second, Ethan. Julian is having a meltdown about the Q3 projections. I have to put out a fire." "It's 8:30 on a Friday," Ethan said, reaching for the wine list but not opening it. "I thought we agreed. No phones tonight." She finally locked her screen and placed it face down on the white tablecloth, though her hand remained resting on it, a protective claw. She sighed, a sound that managed to convey exhaustion and martyrdom in a single breath. "Money never sleeps, Ethan. You know that. Just because your department clocks out at 5 doesn't mean the rest of us have that luxury." Ethan felt the familiar prickle of irritation, but he tamped it down. He wasn't going to let her mood ruin this. He had news. Big news. "I ordered the Bollinger," he said, trying to reset the frequency of the conversation. "I have something to tell you." Victoria picked up her water glass, her eyes scanning the room, checking to see who else was dining tonight. "Oh, did you finally fire that incompetent assistant of yours?" "No," Ethan said, sitting straighter. He placed his hands flat on the table. "I got the promotion. It's official as of this afternoon." Victoria paused. Her gaze flickered back to him, but it was devoid of the warmth he craved. It was calculating. "The senior analyst bump? That's nice, Ethan. Good for you. Maybe we can upgrade the leasing on your Audi." "Not senior analyst," Ethan corrected, his voice steady. "Director of Internal Audit. I'm reporting directly to the board now. It's a completely new tier of oversight." He waited. He waited for the smile, the reach across the table, "Though I'm proud of you." Instead, Victoria stared at him for a beat, and then she laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was a short, sharp exhale through her nose, followed by a smirk that twisted her red lips. She picked up her wine glass, shaking her head as if he had just told a mildly amusing joke. "Director of Internal Audit?" she repeated, the disdain dripping from the syllables like oil. "Oh, honey, that's adorable." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "Excuse me. I mean," she leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "You're basically the hall monitor now. You're the guy who counts the paper clips and makes sure nobody is expensing too many client dinners." It's quaint. It's not paper clips, Victoria. It's risk assessment. It's fraud detection. It's the structural integrity of the entire firm. She waved a dismissive hand, her bracelets jingling. "It's bureaucracy, Ethan. It's the place where creativity goes to die. While people like Julian and I are out there generating millions in revenue, bringing in the actual business, you'll be, what? Checking receipts?" She laughed again, taking a sip of the champagne the sommelier had just poured. "God, your promotion means nothing in the real world, Ethan. But I'm happy you're happy. Really, just don't let the power go to your head. You're still just the guy behind the calculator. Ethan sat frozen. The joy he had carried in his chest all day, the pride of 10 years of meticulous, grinding work, evaporated instantly, leaving behind a cold, hard knot. He looked at his wife, really looked at her. He saw the contempt in her eyes. It wasn't new, he realized. It had been there for years, masked by their busy schedules and social obligations. She didn't just think his job was boring. She thought he was beneath her. At that moment, her phone buzzed against the table. The screen lit up despite being face down, the reflection visible on the polished silver of the butter knife. Ethan saw it. It was upside down, but the text bubble was clear. Jay, did you tell him about LA yet? I booked the suite. Victoria snatched the phone up with a speed that betrayed her casual demeanor. She glanced at the screen, a small, involuntary smile touching her lips. A genuine smile, one she hadn't given Ethan in months. Work? Ethan asked. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Distant. Mechanical. Mum, she hummed, typing a quick reply before sliding the phone into her clutch. Just Julian again. He wants me to fly out to LA next week for the tech summit. Boring, but necessary. LA, Ethan repeated. Business trip. Yes, Ethan. Business. That thing that pays for this dinner. She signaled the waiter. Can we order? I'm starving. Ethan looked at the menu, the letters swimming before his eyes. The humiliation of her mockery was still burning his skin, but beneath it, something else was taking root. Something colder. She thought he was just a hall monitor. She thought he was a man who checked paperclips. She had no idea that Director of Internal Audit meant he now held the keys to the entire digital kingdom of Sterling Vance. He looked at his wife, who was currently inspecting her manicure, completely unbothered by the devastation she had just inflicted on his pride. Let's order, Ethan said, closing the menu. You should get the lobster. You deserve the best. Enjoy it while you can, he thought. The waiter arrived, pen poised. Ethan smiled at him. It was a calm smile. The smile of a man who had just realized that the game had changed, and for the first time, he was the one holding the rulebook. We'll start with the caviar, Ethan said. And keep the champagne coming. My wife has a big trip to prepare for. Victoria didn't notice the edge in his voice. She was too busy thinking about LA. But as Ethan watched her, he didn't see his wife anymore. He saw a liability. And liabilities had to be liquidated. The morning light in the penthouse was unforgiving. It poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master bedroom, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, proof that even in a vacuum of wealth, dirt still existed. Ethan lay awake, as he had for most of the night. Beside him, Victoria was deep in sleep, her breathing rhythmic and heavy. Without the armor of her makeup and the sharp edge of her waking personality, she looked younger, softer. Her hand was tucked under her pillow, the same hand that had waved away his career achievement as if it were a nuisance. Your promotion means nothing. The words echoed in the silence of the room, bouncing off the minimalist white walls. He turned his head to look at her. 10 years. They had been building this life for 10 years, or at least, he thought they were building the same structure. Now, looking at the curve of her shoulder, he wondered if he had just been the contractor for her solo project. He slid out of bed, the Egyptian cotton sheets making a soft rustling sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. He moved to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face. In the mirror, his eyes looked tired, but there was a new sharpness to them. The dull acceptance of her cruelty was gone, replaced by a cold curiosity. When he returned to the bedroom to dress, the room was still silent. Victoria hadn't moved. On her bedside table, her iPad sat docked on its charger. It was usually locked, a black monolith of her privacy. But as Ethan buttoned his shirt, the screen suddenly lit up. A push notification. Ethan froze. He stood at the foot of the bed, his tie half knotted. It was an automated alert from a travel app. The font was small, but in the dim corner of the room, the white text against the dark background was legible enough for someone who spent his life analyzing spreadsheets. Tripit alert. Flight UA 242 to LAX delayed by 40 minutes. New departure. Sunday, 8:15 p.m. Ethan stared at the screen until it went black again. Sunday. Last night, over the vintage champagne he had paid for, she had said she was flying out next week for the summit. The tech summit didn't start until Wednesday. Flying out on Sunday night meant 2 full days unaccounted for before the conference began. 2 days in Los Angeles without a corporate agenda. He finished knotting his tie, his movements precise and mechanical. Sunday. He whispered to himself, testing the weight of the lie. It wasn't just the date. It was the logistics. If she was flying out Sunday for a Wednesday conference, she wasn't billing those extra hotel nights to Sterling Vance. The internal compliance software, the very software he now oversaw, would flag a 3-day gap as a personal expense unless justified by client meetings. Victoria shifted in the bed, groaning softly as she stretched. Ethan watched her, waiting to see if she would wake up and check the device. If she saw the notification, she would clear it instantly. She didn't wake. She rolled over, burying her face in the pillow, safe in the arrogance that her husband was predictable, boring Ethan who went to work and came home and asked no questions. Ethan walked over to the nightstand. For a second, his hand hovered over the iPad. He could swipe it open. He knew her passcode was her birthday. She was too vain to choose anything else and see everything. The emails, the texts, the hotel confirmation. But he pulled his hand back. An amateur would look now and cause a scene. An amateur would scream and wake her up and demand answers, giving her the chance to gaslight him, to tell him he was crazy, to make up a story about pre-conference networking or adjusting to the time zone. Ethan was not an amateur. He was the director of internal audit. You didn't accuse a suspect based on a single data point. You gathered a trend. You established a pattern. You let them feel safe enough to commit the crime on paper. He picked up his watch from the dresser, the Mont Blanc she hadn't even noticed the night before, and fastened it to his wrist. The click of the clasp sounded like the cocking of a gun. He looked at his wife one last time. She was no longer just Victoria, the woman he loved. She was an entity exhibiting irregular behavior. She was a variance in the system. Sleep tight, he murmured. He grabbed his briefcase and walked out of the bedroom, closing the door softly behind him. He didn't head to the kitchen for coffee. He went straight to the elevator. He needed to be at the office. He had a new set of permissions to configure, and he wanted to be the first one logged into the server. The offices of Sterling Vance Global occupied the top 15 floors of a steel monolith in Midtown Manhattan. It was a kingdom of hush-hush deals and aggressive portfolio management, where the air conditioning was always set to a crisp 68 degrees and the silence in the hallways was heavy with ambition. Ethan swiped his badge at the turnstile. The light flashed green, but the beep sounded different today. Or perhaps he just heard it differently. He wasn't heading to his old cubicle in the labyrinth of the 30th floor. He took the express elevator to the 42nd. His new office was a glass box in the sky, overlooking the Hudson River. It was sterile, smelling of new carpet and lemon polish. A standing desk, a Herman Miller chair, and a dual monitor setup that looked more like a cockpit than a workstation awaited him. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," a young IT technician named Marcus said, standing nervously by the desk. "Congratulations on the promotion." "Thank you, Marcus," Ethan said, placing his briefcase on the desk. "We've migrated your profile," Marcus explained, tapping quickly on a tablet. "As Director of Internal Audit, your clearance level has been bumped to Tier 1. It's everything, sir. You have read-write access to the central ledger, expense reporting history, and real-time transaction monitoring for all departments." "Everything?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "Everything," Marcus confirmed. "You're the watchdog now. You can see who bought a coffee in London 5 minutes ago and who booked a flight to Tokyo for next year. Just be careful. There are no firewalls for you anymore." Marcus left, closing the heavy glass door. The silence rushed back in, sealing Ethan inside. He sat down, the leather creaking softly. He stared at the blank screens for a long moment. This was the power Victoria mocked. Glorified bookkeeping, she had called it. She saw numbers as boring constraints. She didn't understand that numbers were the only things in the world that didn't lie. People lied. Marketing pitches lied. Smiles over candlelight dinners lied. But the ledger? The ledger was absolute. Ethan logged in. The system welcomed him with a blue dashboard. "Welcome, Director Caldwell." He spent the first hour doing exactly what he was paid to do. He reviewed the quarterly risk assessments, approved a few compliance checks, and organized his dashboard. He was a professional. He respected the sanctity of the data. But the notification from the morning, Sunday, 8:15 p.m., kept scratching at the back of his mind. He swiveled his chair to look out at the city. Somewhere down there, in a trendy loft in Soho or a glass office similar to this one, Victoria was likely laughing with Julian, perhaps planning their weekend. She thought she was clever. She thought she was operating in the shadows. Ethan turned back to the screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He wasn't investigating an employee. He was investigating a potential misuse of company assets. That was his job description. If the VP of marketing was using company funds for personal travel, it was fraud. It didn't matter that she was his wife. In fact, that made the risk higher. His heart hammered against his ribs, a slow, heavy thud. Crossing this line meant he couldn't go back to being the oblivious husband. He opened the travel and expense module. It was a vast database of every dollar spent by Sterling Vance employees. In the search bar, the cursor blinked. Waiting. Ethan typed, "Caldwell, Victoria." The system processed for a fraction of a second, then populated a list. Hundreds of entries. Client dinners, Ubers, flights, hotels. The architecture of her career laid out in rows and columns. He narrowed the search parameters. Date range, upcoming. Department, marketing. The screen refreshed. There it was. A flight booking for Sunday night to Los Angeles. United Airlines. First class. Ethan clicked on the details. The cost was charged to Project Code SV, MKT, 2024. That was the general marketing budget. Standard procedure. But then he opened a second tab. He typed in another name. Thorne, Julian. The system populated Julian's expenses. Ethan filtered for the same dates. Julian Thorne was also booked on a flight to Los Angeles. Not United, but Delta. Departure time, Sunday, 9 p.m. 45 minutes after Victoria. Smart, Ethan thought. Different airlines to avoid being seen at the gate together. Plausible deniability, if anyone asked. But then he looked at the accommodation. Victoria, the Peninsula Beverly Hills. Villa Suite. Julian, the Peninsula Beverly Hills. Garden Suite. Same hotel. Same check-in date. Both suites charged to the company. Ethan stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in his eyes. The numbers stared back, cold and irrefutable. There was no client meeting on Sunday night. There was no tech summit until Wednesday. They were stealing from the company to finance a romantic getaway, and they were so arrogant about it that they hadn't even tried to hide the paper trail. They just assumed no one would look. Ethan leaned back in his chair. He didn't feel the crushing sadness he expected. He felt a strange, icy clarity. He picked up the phone on his desk, not to call her, but to verify the line was working. He replaced the receiver. "Let's see what else you've expensed," he whispered to the empty room. He began to scroll back. Last month, Miami. The month before, Chicago. The audit had officially begun. The office air conditioning hummed, a low, constant vibration that usually faded into the background, but today it felt loud, pressing against Ethan's eardrums. Outside his glass walls, the sky over Manhattan was turning a bruised purple as evening approached. Most of the staff had left for the weekend, but the light in the Director of Internal Audit's office remained steadfast. Ethan wasn't looking at the upcoming Los Angeles trip anymore. That was just the tip of the iceberg. He was diving deep into the dark water beneath. He had pulled the records for the last 6 months. The dual monitors were split. Victoria's expense reports on the left, Julian Thorne's on the right. He scrolled back to November. The Miami Client Retention Summit. Ethan remembered that week vividly. Victoria had called him every night, her voice tight with stress, complaining about the humidity, the demanding clients, the endless breakout sessions that ran until midnight. He had felt guilty for being at home in their comfortable apartment while she was slaving away for the firm. He had even sent flowers to her hotel room to cheer her up. He found the entry. November 14th to 17th. The hotel listed on her itinerary was the Marriott Marquis, a standard, approved business hotel. But when Ethan clicked on the actual credit card transaction linked to the folio, the merchant wasn't the Marriott. Transaction ID 9928 X. Merchant Faena Hotel, Miami Beach. Amount $4,200. Ethan paused. The Faena was not standard. It was opulence defined, red velvet, gold leaf, and ocean views that cost more per night than an analyst made in a week. She had manually overridden the booking code, classifying it as Client Hospitality Suite. He shifted his gaze to the right monitor. Julian's log. November 14th to 17th. Merchant, Faena Hotel, Miami Beach. Charge, Pow by Polka dinner. Ethan opened the scanned receipt attached to Julian's expense report. The system required receipts for any meal over $75. This one was for $640. The PDF loaded slowly. It was a wrinkled slip of thermal paper, smoothed out and photographed. Table 42. Guests, 2. Time, 8:45 p.m. Ethan looked at the date and time. November 15th, 8:45 p.m. He unlocked his own phone and opened his text history with Victoria. He scrolled back, his thumb trembling slightly. November 15th, 8:42 p.m. Ethan, hope the dinner with the client goes well. Don't work too hard. Love you. November 15th, 9:10 p.m. Victoria, it's a nightmare. These people are insufferable. I just want to be home with you. Ordering room service and crashing early. Miss you. Ethan looked from the phone to the screen. She hadn't been suffering. She hadn't been with clients. She had been sitting at table 42 at the Faena, likely looking out at the ocean, sipping the bottle of Caymus Cabernet listed on the receipt, the same wine they had drunk at their wedding. Room service, Ethan whispered, the words tasting like ash. He zoomed in on the receipt. The appetizers, the entrees, the dessert, something called the golden egg. And then, at the bottom, the signature. Julian's sprawling, arrogant signature was on the line, but right next to it, scrawled in the margin in a familiar, looped handwriting, was a note to the server. Put the extra tip on the room charge. Room 802. Victoria's handwriting. Room 802. Ethan closed his eyes. The visual was too sharp. He could see them there. He could see the way Julian likely leaned across the table, the way Victoria would have laughed, that genuine, throaty laugh she never used with him anymore. They were spending the company's money to mock him. They weren't just cheating. They were stealing. They were embezzling corporate funds to finance a fantasy life, categorizing their lust as client development. Ethan opened a new digital folder on his secure drive. He named it simply Case File 404. He began to drag and drop. The Faena receipt. The flight manifests. The discrepancies in the hotel folios. The text messages from his phone, which he screenshotted and uploaded to compare against the timestamps of the dinners. It was a meticulous reconstruction of a crime. He worked for another 2 hours. He found a weekend in Chicago that never happened, Ritz-Carlton. A conference in San Francisco that was actually a wine tour in Napa, charged as vendor transport. By the time he was done, he had documented over $40,000 of misappropriated funds in 6 months. He saved the file. The cursor blinked, a rhythmic heartbeat in the center of the screen. Ethan stood up and walked to the window. The city was fully dark now, a grid of electric jewels. He felt a strange hollowness in his chest, as if his heart had been scooped out, leaving only the cold machinery of his intellect behind. He knew what he had to do next. The data was irrefutable, but data was cold. He needed to see the human element. He needed to look her in the eye and give her one last chance to tell the truth, even though he knew she wouldn't take it. He picked up his briefcase. It felt heavier than usual. He was going home to his wife. He was going home to the stranger living in his house. The apartment was quiet when Ethan unlocked the door, save for the low hum of the wine fridge and the distant sound of the television in the living room. It was nearly 10 o'clock. In a different life, the one he thought he was living 48 hours ago, he would have come home tired but eager to share the details of his first day as director. Now, he felt like an undercover agent entering hostile territory. He found Victoria in the living room. She was sitting on the beige sectional, Surrounded by a scattering of clothes, she was folding into her Tumi suitcase. A glass of red wine sat on the coffee table, dangerously close to a stack of silk blouses. She didn't look up as he entered. She was holding a swimsuit, a white one-piece with a plunging neckline, inspecting it for loose threads. "You're home late," she said, her tone absent. "I thought you'd be celebrating with the other auditors." "Do auditors celebrate? Or do you just organize your spreadsheets in a festive font?" Ethan didn't take the bait. He loosened his tie, walking over to the kitchen island that separated them. He poured himself a glass of water, watching her through the reflection in the dark window. "First day was busy," he said evenly. "Lots of systems to review." He walked around the counter and stood near the sofa. He looked at the swimsuit in her hand. "A swimsuit for a tech summit?" he asked. Victoria didn't flinch. She folded the suit smoothly and placed it in the suitcase. "The hotel has a pool, Ethan. Networking happens everywhere. You can't close a deal if you're the only one sitting in a suit while the clients are swimming." "Right," Ethan said. "Networking." He took a breath. This was it, the final variable in his equation. "I was thinking," he started, keeping his voice soft, almost hopeful. "I know you have to leave for LA, but the summit doesn't actually kick off until Wednesday morning. You're flying out Sunday night." Victoria stopped packing. Her back stiffened. So, that leaves tomorrow and Sunday morning," Ethan said. "Let's drive out to the Hamptons. Just for the night. We haven't been to the house since last summer. The weather is supposed to be perfect. We could have a late dinner, walk on the beach. Just us. Celebrate my promotion properly." He watched her carefully. He was offering her an out. If she said yes, if she showed even a flicker of desire to be with him, he might pause the investigation. He might hesitate. Victoria turned slowly to face him. Her expression wasn't one of conflict or regret. It was one of incredulity. "Are you serious?" she asked, a small, incredulous laugh escaping her lips. "Why not? Ethan, look at this." She gestured wildly at the open suitcase and the pile of clothes. "I am drowning in prep work. I have presentations to memorize, client profiles to review, and packing to finish. And you want to, what? Go frolic on the beach? Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under? It's just one night, Tori. You're always saying you're stressed. Relaxing might help." "Relaxing?" She stood up now, her height enhanced by the heels she hadn't taken off yet. Her eyes flashed with anger. "That is exactly the difference between us, Ethan. You think you can just clock out. You think success just happens. I don't have the luxury of relaxing 2 days before the biggest summit of the quarter. It's not just about relaxing." Ethan pressed, his voice steady, masking the pain. "It's about us. I feel like I haven't seen you in weeks." "Oh my God," she groaned, throwing her hands up. "Please don't do this. Do not do the needy husband routine right now. I cannot handle it. I am trying to secure a future for us, for this lifestyle, and you're acting like a clingy teenager because I can't hold your hand for 24 hours. She glared at him, the accusation hanging in the air. "You're being selfish," she spat. "I am working my ass off, and you're making this about you." Ethan looked at her. He saw the genuine irritation in her face. She truly believed her own narrative. She had rationalized the affair so completely that his request for affection was seen as an intrusion on her work. "Selfish," Ethan repeated quietly. "Yes, selfish." She grabbed her wine glass and took a large swallow. "So no, Ethan. We are not going to the Hamptons. I am going to finish packing, I am going to focus on this trip, and I am going to do my job. I suggest you do yours." Ethan nodded slowly. "You're right. I should do my job." He set his water glass down on a coaster. "I'm sorry I asked," he said. And he meant it. He was sorry he had given her the chance to lie to his face one last time. "Good," she said, turning back to the suitcase. "Now can you move? You're blocking the light." Ethan stepped aside. He watched her pack the white swimsuit, tucking it next to a sheer cover-up that was definitely not appropriate for a technology conference. The test was complete. The subject had failed. "I'm going to bed," Ethan said. "I have some reading to do." "Fine," she muttered, not looking up. "Don't wait up for me." Ethan walked down the hallway to the guest room. He had started sleeping there occasionally because of his snoring, Another lie she had encouraged, and closed the door. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his phone. He didn't look at photos of them. He opened the airline app. He wasn't going to the Hamptons. But he wasn't staying here either. He booked a ticket. Not on her flight, and not on Julian's. He booked a seat on an American Airlines flight to Los Angeles leaving Sunday morning. If she wanted to work so badly, he decided he would go and see her work in person. Los Angeles smelled different than New York. It was the scent of jasmine, exhaust fumes, and dry heat that lingered even after the sun went down. Ethan sat in the back of a rented dark sedan, parked discreetly across the circular driveway of the Peninsula Beverly Hills. He had arrived that morning, hours before them. He had watched the sun track across the sky, turning the stucco walls of the hotel from blinding white to a soft, deceptive gold. He hadn't checked in. He wasn't a guest here. He was a ghost. His phone buzzed. A flight alert. Delta Flight 492 has landed. 20 minutes later, United Flight 242 has landed. They had arrived separately, maintaining the charade until the very last mile. Ethan checked his watch. It was 9:45 p.m. The traffic from LAX would be thinning. He waited. His hands were resting on the steering wheel, perfectly still. He checked his pulse against his wrist watch, 72 beats per minute. Normal. It frightened him, how calm he was. He was about to watch his wife walk into a hotel with another man, and his body was reacting as if he were waiting for a spreadsheet to load. At 10:20 p.m., a black Escalade pulled up to the valet stand. Ethan rolled his window down an inch, letting the night air in, sharpening his senses. The passenger door opened. Julian Thorne stepped out first. He looked every inch the conqueror. Linen blazer, unbuttoned crisp white shirt, the casual confidence of a man who believed the rules didn't apply to him. He didn't look around. He didn't check his surroundings. He turned back to the car and offered a hand. And then, Victoria emerged. She wasn't wearing the travel clothes she had left the apartment in. She had changed. She was wearing the white dress she usually saved for their anniversary dinners. She took Julian's hand, not for support, but with a familiarity that made Ethan's breath catch in his throat. It wasn't a business handshake. It was a clasp. Julian's thumb grazed her wrist, a small, intimate circle that spoke of ownership. They stood there for a moment under the warm glow of the hotel entrance lights. The valet was unloading their luggage, 2 bags, placed side by side. Victoria threw her head back and laughed at something Julian said. It was the laugh. The one Ethan had heard at the restaurant in New York, but this time it wasn't mocking. It was light, free, and unguarded. It was the laugh of a woman who was exactly where she wanted to be, with exactly who she wanted to be. Ethan watched them. He didn't pull out his phone to take a picture. He didn't need to. The internal cameras of the hotel, the credit card transactions, the flight logs, the digital net was already tight. This moment, this was for him. He needed to see it. He needed to see that she wasn't stressed. She wasn't pressured. She was happy. She was stealing from their life, from his dignity, and from the company, and she was happy doing it. Julian leaned in, whispering something in her ear. Victoria's hand came up, resting lightly on his chest, her fingers curling into the lapel of his jacket. They turned and walked into the lobby, their shoulders brushing. They looked like a power couple. They looked like they owned the world. Ethan watched until the glass doors slid shut behind them, cutting off the view. He sat in the silence of the car for a long time. The image was burned into his retinas. The white dress, the hand on the chest, the shared secret. He finally reached for the ignition. He didn't need to stay. He knew which room they were in, Villa Suite. He knew who paid for it. He knew what they were ordering from room service. He started the car. The engine purred to life, a low growl in the quiet street. Audit complete, he whispered. He put the car in gear and drove away, merging into the darkness of Santa Monica Boulevard. He wasn't going to interrupt them. He wasn't going to cause a scene in the lobby. That was messy. That was emotional. He was going back to New York. He had a meeting to arrange for Tuesday morning. The 42nd floor of Sterling Vance Global was a tomb on Sunday nights. The cleaners had already come and gone, leaving the carpets with fresh vacuum lines that stretched down the dark corridors. Ethan sat in his glass office, the only source of light in the entire wing coming from his 3 monitors. He had flown back from Los Angeles on the red-eye, landing at JFK at 6 a.m. He hadn't gone home to shower. He hadn't slept. He had come straight here, fueled by black coffee and a terrifyingly lucid adrenaline. On the desk in front of him lay a pristine, empty binder. On the screens, the life of his wife and her lover was being dismantled, bite by bite. Ethan was no longer a husband. He was a machine. He opened the master spreadsheet he had created, audit_ref_2024_exec_marketing. Let's stick to the facts, he muttered, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. The sound was rhythmic, like gunfire in the silence. Fact 1. The geolocation data. All company-issued devices at Sterling Vance came with Mobile Device Management, MDM, software installed for security. It tracked location to ensure asset safety. Ethan pulled the logs for Victoria's iPhone and Julian's iPad. He overlaid the data points on a map of Los Angeles. 2 dots, blue and red. Saturday, 11 p.m., blue dot at the peninsula. Red dot at the peninsula. Sunday, 12:30 p.m., blue dot moving along the Pacific Coast Highway. Red dot moving along the Pacific Coast Highway. Distance between devices, less than 2 meters. Sunday, 2 p.m., both dots stationary at Nobu Malibu. Ethan alt-tabbed to the expense report system. Sunday, 2 p.m., charge on Julian Thorne's corporate Amex at Nobu Malibu. Justification, client lunch, prospective investors. Ethan opened Salesforce, the company's CRM database. He searched for the investors Julian had listed in the notes. He checked their LinkedIn profiles. One was currently posting photos from a conference in London. The other had retired 3 months ago. Fabrication of business purpose. Ethan typed into the column labeled violation type. Fact 2. The gift. Ethan scrolled back to February. Valentine's Day. He remembered Victoria coming home with a diamond tennis bracelet. She had told him she bought it for herself as a bonus treat because her department had crushed their Q1 goals. Ethan searched the expense logs for that week. Nothing under jewelry. But then he checked Julian's miscellaneous vendor gifts category. February 13th, Tiffany & Company. Item, corporate gifting, service awards. Cost, $5,800. Ethan pulled the serial number from the receipt scanned into the system. It was a long shot, but he logged into the Tiffany & Company corporate portal. Sterling Vance was a platinum corporate client, and as director of audit, he had access to the purchasing history. Item description, diamond tennis bracelet, 2CT. He felt a cold smirk touch his lips. She was wearing stolen property. The bracelet on her wrist wasn't a gift of love. It was embezzlement categorized as a vendor perk. Fact 3. The pattern. Ethan spent the next 4 hours linking every business trip to a corresponding lie. He found 7 instances where they booked flights on the same day. He found 4 instances where they stayed at the same hotel. He found $42,000 worth of meals, spa treatments, luxury car services, and consulting fees that were nothing more than romantic overhead. He didn't feel the sting of betrayal anymore. The pain had cauterized. Now he just felt the satisfaction of the math working out. The numbers balanced. The deficit was emotional, but the debt was financial, and Sterling Vance collected its debts aggressively. At 4 a.m., the printer in the corner whirred to life. Ethan watched as page after page slid into the tray. Exhibit A, the timeline. Exhibit B, the false invoices. Exhibit C, the geolocation overlays. Exhibit D, the client verifications. He stood up, his joints popping from sitting too long. He walked over to the printer and gathered the warm stack of paper. It was thick, heavy. It weighed about as much as a human heart, he thought, though it was infinitely colder. He took the 3-hole punch and perforated the stack. Kerchunk. The sound was final. He placed the documents into the black binder. On the cover, he slid a white label into the plastic sleeve. He didn't write Victoria Caldwell or Julian Thorne. He wrote, Internal Investigation, Misappropriation of Funds, Executive Level. He placed the binder in the center of his desk. Then, he opened his email. He composed a new message. To Sarah Jenkins, VP of Human Resources, David Sterling, General Counsel. From Ethan Caldwell, Director of Internal Audit. Subject, urgent, executive compliance violation, immediate review required. Body, Sarah, David, please clear your schedules for 9 a.m. tomorrow. I have uncovered a significant pattern of fraud involving senior leadership in the marketing and revenue departments. The evidence is conclusive. Hard copy is on my desk. Regards, Ethan. He hovered over the send button. Sending this wasn't just firing his wife. It was nuking her reputation. It was ensuring she would never work in a high-level corporate job in this city again. He thought about the laugh he heard in Los Angeles. He thought about the phrase, "Your promotion means nothing." He clicked send. The email swooshed away. Ethan closed his laptop. He picked up his coat. He was going to go home, shower, put on his best suit, and wait for Tuesday morning. The execution was scheduled. Victoria returned on Monday night, sweeping into the penthouse like a conquering general returning from a distant campaign. The door swung open, and with it came a gust of energy, the frenetic, buzzing high of someone who has spent 48 hours living a fantasy. Ethan was sitting in the living room, a book open on his lap, though he hadn't turned a page in an hour. He watched her enter. She looked radiant. There was a flush to her skin that the fluorescent lights of JFK hadn't managed to dull, a subtle golden tan that didn't come from sitting in conference rooms. She was wearing the same travel clothes she left in, but she wore them differently now, looser, with a careless sort of grace. "God, I am exhausted," she announced, dropping her Tumi bag in the hallway with a heavy thud. She kicked off her heels and walked straight to the kitchen, bypassing him entirely. "Do we have wine? I need a glass." The flight was a nightmare. Turbulence over the Rockies for 2 hours. Ethan marked the lie. He had tracked her flight. It had been smooth, landing 20 minutes early. "There's a bottle of Pinot in the fridge," Ethan said, marking his page and setting the book down. "How was the summit?" Victoria poured the wine, filling the glass to the brim. She took a long sip, closing her eyes, then turned to face him, leaning her hip against the marble counter. "Intense," she said, her eyes wide with feigned stress. "Just wall-to-wall meetings." The keynote speaker droned on for 3 hours about AI integration. And the clients? Needy doesn't even begin to cover it. I barely had time to shower, let alone breathe. She was good, Ethan thought. If he didn't know better, if he hadn't seen her laughing in the driveway of the peninsula, if he hadn't seen the receipt for the couple's massage charged to the employee wellness code, he would have believed her. She sold the exhaustion perfectly. "Did you get the account?" Ethan asked, standing up and walking slowly toward her. "We're close," she said, a smirk playing on her lips. "Julian and I absolutely crushed the pitch this morning. Honestly, Ethan, I don't want to sound arrogant, but nobody does it like we do. We walked out of that room and knew we owned them." "I'm sure you did," Ethan said. "You and Julian make quite a team." "We do," she agreed, missing the edge in his voice. She took another sip of wine, her gaze drifting over his shoulder to the view of the city. "That's actually why tomorrow is so important. HR set up a meeting for us at 9 a.m. Sarah Jenkins and David Sterling are going to be there." Ethan felt a cold spike in his chest. "David Sterling? The general counsel?" "Yeah." Victoria waved a hand dismissively. "It's probably about restructuring the commission packages for the new quarter. Or maybe they're finally going to give me the equity partner title I've been asking for. You don't bring in legal unless you're drawing up new contracts." She looked at him then, her eyes gleaming with hubris. She truly believed she was untouchable. She believed the world was a vending machine that gave her whatever she wanted if she just kicked it hard enough. "That sounds significant," Ethan said. "It is," she said, walking past him toward the bedroom. She paused, placing a hand on his arm. It was a patronizing pat, like one would give a loyal dog. "I know I've been distant, Ethan, but once this deal is signed and the promotion is locked in, things will calm down. I promise. We can, I don't know, go to dinner or something." "Or something," Ethan echoed. She didn't hear him. She was already unzipping her suitcase. "I'm going to take a bath. I need to be fresh for tomorrow. I need to look perfect when I walk into that room." You should, Ethan said to her, retreating back. You'll want to look your best. He listened as the bathroom door clicked shut. A moment later, the sound of running water filled the apartment. Ethan stood in the kitchen, the ghost of her perfume lingering in the air. It was a floral scent, mixed with something else, sandalwood. Julian's cologne. She hadn't even bothered to wash it off before coming home. He walked over to the counter where she had left her phone. It was face up this time. She was so confident in his blindness that she didn't even hide it anymore. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. He looked at the clock. 10:15 p.m. In less than 12 hours, she would walk into conference room B. She expected a promotion. She expected praise. She expected more money to fund more trips to Miami and LA. She had no idea that the person sitting across from her wouldn't be a client. It would be her husband, with a binder full of receipts that proved she wasn't an asset to Sterling Vance Global. She was a liability. Ethan turned off the kitchen lights, plunging the room into darkness. Rest up, Victoria, he whispered into the quiet. You're going to have a long day. Tuesday morning at Sterling Vance Global was usually a flurry of caffeine and high-frequency trading, but the hallway leading to conference room B felt strangely pressurized. It was a corner room, encased in frosted glass that offered privacy while still letting in the cold, gray light of the Manhattan skyline. Victoria adjusted her blazer. She had chosen her outfit with the precision of a weapon, a crimson power suit, tailored to perfection, paired with the diamond tennis bracelet that glittered on her wrist. She checked her reflection in the glass panel of the door. She looked unstoppable. She looked like a partner. She checked her phone one last time. A text from Julian. See you in the winner's circle. Don't forget to act surprised when they mention the equity shares. She smiled, a sharp, confident curve of her lips. She slipped the phone into her pocket and pushed the heavy glass door open. Good morning, everyone, she announced, her voice pitching perfectly between warmth and authority. Sorry to keep you waiting. The elevator bank was. The sentence died in her throat. She had expected a celebration. She had expected champagne, perhaps a firm handshake from the CEO, or at the very least, Julian sitting there with a smug grin. Instead, the room was silent. At the far end of the long mahogany table sat 3 people. On the left was Sarah Jenkins, the Vice President of Human Resources, a woman known for her smile, who was currently not smiling. Her hands were folded on top of a notepad. On the right was David Sterling, the General Counsel. He was a man who only appeared when someone was being sued or fired. He was looking at Victoria over the rim of his glasses with an expression of mild distaste. And in the center was Ethan. Victoria blinked. For a second, her brain refused to process the visual data. Ethan didn't belong here. Ethan belonged in his quiet office on the 42nd floor, or at home waiting for her with dinner. He was wearing his charcoal suit, the one she had picked out for him, but he looked different. He wasn't slouching. He wasn't smiling apologetically. He was sitting perfectly still, his hands resting on a thick black binder. Ethan, she asked, the confidence draining from her voice, replaced by a sharp note of confusion. What are you doing here? Is something wrong at home? She took a step forward, her instincts trying to reframe the situation into something domestic, something she could control. Did something happen to the apartment? Sit down, Victoria, Sarah Jenkins said. Her voice was flat. It wasn't a request. Victoria froze. She looked from Sarah to David, and then back to Ethan. Ethan didn't look at her. He was staring at a point on the wall just past her left ear, his expression unreadable. It was the face of a stranger. I don't understand, Victoria said, a nervous laugh bubbling up. Is this a joke? Julian said we were discussing the restructuring. Where's Julian? Mr. Thorne is in conference room A with the CEO and the external auditors, David Sterling said, his voice like gravel. His employment is currently being reassessed, as is yours. The words hit her like a physical blow. Employment. Reassessed. Victoria pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table. She sat down slowly, her knees suddenly feeling weak. She gripped the armrests, her knuckles turning white. I don't know what you think is going on, she began, her defense mechanisms kicking in. She channeled her outrage. But if this is about the Q3 numbers, Julian and I just secured a massive verbal agreement in Los Angeles. We have been working nonstop. We know about Los Angeles, Ethan said. It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was calm, terrifyingly level. He finally shifted his gaze to meet hers. There was no love in his eyes. There was no anger. There was only the cold, clinical detachment of a man looking at a spreadsheet error. He opened the black binder. The sound of the heavy cover hitting the table echoed in the room. We know about Los Angeles, Ethan repeated. We know about Miami. We know about the Faena Hotel. We know about the rental car charges. We know about the client dinners at Nobu where no clients were present. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. Ethan, stop. What are you doing? You can't. I am the director of internal audit. Ethan interrupted her, his voice slicing through her panic. It is my fiduciary duty to investigate financial irregularities within the firm. And I have found significant irregularities in the marketing budget. He slid a photo across the long, polished table. It spun slowly and came to a stop right in front of her hands. It wasn't a blurry paparazzi shot. It was a printout of a digital receipt. The Peninsula, Beverly Hills. Villa Suite. Guest name, Victoria Caldwell. Payment method, Sterling Vance Corp card ending in 4092. Next to it, he slid another paper. A timeline map. 2 dots moving in unison along the Santa Monica coastline. This isn't a strategy meeting, Victoria, Ethan said, and for a brief second, she saw the ghost of a sad smile on his lips. This is a termination hearing, and we have the receipts. All of them. Victoria looked at the papers. Then she looked up at her husband. She opened her mouth to speak, to lie, to charm, to scream, but nothing came out. The trap hadn't just sprung, it had crushed her. The silence in conference room B was heavy, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. Victoria stared at the receipt on the table, the Peninsula, Beverly Hills, as if it were a foreign object she had never seen before. Then she laughed. It was a brittle, jagged sound. This is ridiculous, she said, looking up at David Sterling, ignoring Ethan completely. You're firing me over hotel rooms? David, come on. You know how business works. High-level clients expect a certain lifestyle. If I have to upgrade a room to close a $10 million deal, that's not fraud. That's ROI. David Sterling didn't blink. He adjusted his glasses, looking at her with the weariness of a man who had heard every excuse in the book. There were no clients, Victoria, David said softly. We contacted the prospects you listed. None of them were in Los Angeles. You weren't closing deals. You were on vacation. I was prospecting. Victoria insisted, her voice rising. She slammed her hand on the table, the diamond bracelet clinking against the wood. You can't quantify relationship building. It's soft power. I was networking. Networking, Ethan repeated. Victoria whipped her head toward him. Don't you dare speak to me like that. You have no idea what it takes to bring money into this firm. You sit in your little glass box and look at spreadsheets while people like Julian and I are out there in the trenches. Julian has already confessed, Ethan lied. He didn't know if Julian had confessed, but he knew the risk profile of men like Julian. They folded the moment their own severance packages were threatened. Victoria faltered. Her mouth opened, then closed. The color drained from her cheeks. What? He's cooperating, Ethan said, his voice flat. He confirmed that the meetings were personal. He confirmed the dinners were romantic in nature. And he confirmed that you instructed him on how to hide the charges under the miscellaneous code. That bastard, she whispered. The fight went out of her shoulders. She slumped back in her chair. Then, she looked at Ethan. Her eyes changed. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a desperate, manipulative softness. She leaned forward, reaching a hand across the table toward him. Ethan, she said, her voice trembling. Baby, please. This is insane. We're married. You can't do this to me. We can fix this. I can pay back the money. I'll write a check right now. Just stop this. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Ethan looked at her hand. He remembered how that hand had felt on his shoulder when she told him his promotion meant nothing. He remembered seeing that hand on Julian's chest in the driveway. He didn't take it. It's not a misunderstanding, Miss Caldwell, Ethan said formally. It's embezzlement. And regarding the check, you will be paying it back. But that's separate from your employment status. He reached into the binder and pulled out one final document. And the bracelet, he said, nodding at her wrist. Victoria instinctively covered the jewelry with her other hand. What? The Tiffany bracelet, Ethan said. Expensed by Mr. Thorne as service awards on February 13th. That is company property. It was purchased with stolen funds. The room went deadly silent. Sarah Jenkins, the HR VP, looked away, embarrassed for her. Victoria looked down at the diamonds. The symbol of her affair. The gift she had flaunted in front of her husband, claiming she bought it herself. It wasn't a trophy anymore. It was a shackle. You audited the jewelry? She whispered, horror dawning on her. You watched everything. I watched the money, Ethan corrected. The money tells the story. David Sterling cleared his throat. Victoria, your employment is terminated effective immediately for cause. This includes a forfeiture of all unvested stock options and a clawback of your last 2 quarterly bonuses to cover the misappropriated funds. Security is waiting outside to escort you to your desk to collect your personal effects. Only personal effects. No devices. Victoria stood up. She was shaking. She looked small in her power suit now. The illusion of the high-powered executive had shattered, leaving only a woman who had gambled everything on a lie and lost. She looked at Ethan one last time. There was hate in her eyes now, pure and unadulterated. You enjoyed this, she hissed. You sat there at dinner and let me lie to you, just so you could do this. You're a psychopath. I'm an auditor, Ethan said, closing the binder. I just balanced the books. Sarah Jenkins stood up and opened the door. 2 security guards were waiting in the hallway. This way, please, Sarah said. Victoria straightened her spine, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. She walked out of the room without looking back. Ethan sat alone at the table for a moment after the door closed. The air conditioner hummed. The room was empty. He placed his hand on the closed binder. The leather was cool to the touch. He had won. He had destroyed the threat. He had protected the company. But as he looked at the empty chair where his wife had sat, he realized that the ledger still wasn't balanced. Because no matter how much money he clawed back, he was still going home to an empty apartment. The apartment was silent, but it wasn't the peaceful silence of a sanctuary. It was the echoey, hollow silence of a space being dismantled. Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of scotch in his hand. He hadn't turned on the overhead lights. The only illumination came from the city outside, the endless grid of Manhattan that didn't care about the tragedy playing out in Penthouse 4B. Behind him, the sound of a zipper cutting through the air was sharp and final. Victoria was packing. She wasn't the woman in the crimson power suit anymore. She was wearing jeans and a gray sweater, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. Without the armor of her corporate identity, she looked smaller. Frail almost. She had been allowed back into the building one last time, supervised by the doorman, to collect her personal belongings. She moved with a mechanical efficiency, folding clothes, stacking books, clearing off the vanity. Ethan didn't offer to help. He just watched her reflection in the glass. That's the last of it, Victoria said. Her voice was raspy. She had been crying earlier, he knew, but her eyes were dry now. Ethan turned around. 3 large suitcases stood by the door. The rest of her things, the furniture she had picked out, the art she claimed to love, would stay. They were just assets now. Where will you go? Ethan asked. It wasn't a question born of concern. It was a logistical query. Julian's, she said, then let out a short, bitter laugh. For a few days, anyway. Until he gets evicted. Apparently, the company is suing him for breach of contract. He's losing everything. Actions have consequences, Ethan said quietly. Victoria looked at him. She crossed the room, stopping a few feet away. She studied his face as if trying to find the man she had married 10 years ago, the man she had called boring. You really hated me, she whispered. I didn't realize how much you hated me until today. I didn't hate you, Victoria, Ethan replied, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I loved you. That was the problem. If I had hated you, I would have just divorced you. But I loved you, and you treated me like a fool. You laughed at me. He took a sip of the scotch. You turned our marriage into a transaction, he continued. So I audited it. I just closed the account. Victoria flinched. She looked down at her hands. Her ring finger was bare. She had left the engagement ring on the kitchen counter next to her keys. You won, she said softly. You're the director. You have the apartment. You have your reputation. Yes. Is it enough? She asked, her eyes searching his. Is it going to keep you warm at night, Ethan? Being right? Ethan looked past her at the empty hallway. It's better than being lied to, he said. Victoria nodded slowly. She knew there was nothing left to say. There were no apologies that could fix this, no arguments that could change the balance sheet. She walked to the door and grabbed the handle of her suitcase. She paused, her hand on the brass knob. Goodbye, Ethan. Goodbye, Victoria. The door clicked shut. Ethan stood alone in the center of the living room. He listened to the sound of her heels retreating down the hallway, then the ding of the elevator, and finally, silence. He walked over to the kitchen counter. The diamond ring caught the light from the street lamps outside. It was a beautiful stone. Perfect clarity. High value. He picked it up, feeling the cold metal against his palm. She was right, in a way. The victory was cold. The apartment was too big. The silence was deafening. He had cut out the rod, but he had lost the limb in the process. But then he remembered the text message on her phone. He remembered the laugh at the restaurant. Your promotion means nothing. He dropped the ring into the trash can. It landed with a dull thud. Ethan walked back to the window. He looked out at the city, a chaotic, messy, beautiful system of risks and rewards. He took a deep breath. For the first time in months, the air in his lungs felt clean. He was alone, but he was solvent. And tomorrow, he had work to do.